In Module 1, we looked at what we mean by leadership for crew well-being and some of the qualities that a modern leader needs in order to look after their people. Module 2 suggested ways in which to judge the state of well-being on your vessel. In this third module, we offer suggestions for how you can personally create or improve crew well-being on your ship by ensuring a positive atmosphere on board. Some ships have pools, saunas, cinemas, gyms, free internet connection, libraries and good-sized spaces for social events. Some don't. It's obvious that having such facilities can improve the well-being of the crew, and they are the sort of benefits mentioned by seafarers when asked what they like about working at sea. However, you as a leader have an influence over the relationships between crew members on board your vessel. Let's take a look at some of the relationship issues that seafarers reported as making them unhappy or depressed.
Being blamed for things that were not my fault.
Being shouted at.
A bossy captain.
Discrimination.
Falling out with superiors.
Interestingly, each and every one of these points to a lack of good leadership. Let's take the first.
Being blamed for things that were not my fault.
A blame culture is bad for several reasons. You're unlikely to get to the root cause of a problem if you simply blame the person closest to the incident. For instance, when a Boeing 737 MAX of Indonesian airline Lion Air crashed, there were calls to blame the pilots for making mistakes. 5 months later, another Boeing 737 MAX crashed. Again, there were calls to blame the pilots. As we now know, there was a new piece of software on these new aircraft that automatically pushes the nose down at certain angles. None of the pilots involved in the crashes were aware of this software. Blame cultures stop people speaking up, and underlying problems are either covered up or not discovered, making accidents more likely to occur. Our job as leaders is to create a fair culture, not a blame culture. How do we do that? You may wish to pause the program to reflect on this question. First, lead by example. Don't blame others for your mistakes. Not only will you gain respect and loyalty from your team, you'll help prevent a blame culture from emerging. Second, when you do hold someone to account, do so constructively. Sometimes mistakes need to be publicized, but in these cases, make sure that the goal is to learn from the mistake and not to humiliate the person who made it. Third, always focus on learning. Create a culture on your vessel where learning, rather than pretending mistakes can't happen, is the top priority. This will ensure that people feel free to talk and to learn from errors. Let's go back to the list of relationship factors that damage the well-being of seafarers. Being shouted at. Unless there is an emergency, nobody in the workplace should be shouted at. Raising your voice to be heard is different from bellowing in somebody's face. That is not professional, and it does nothing for effective team working. A bossy captain. In previous modules, we explored how the old-fashioned command and control model of leadership is not fit for the modern maritime environment. The captain may be the boss of the vessel, but they should still treat their crew with respect. Discrimination. It's our job and our legal responsibility as leaders to ensure that people are not discriminated against for their race, gender, religion, or any other visible or invisible difference. And falling out with superiors. Where this happens, it's the role of the most senior leader of the bridge or engine room to make sure their teams are working properly together. Failing to do so risks the well-being of crew members and the safe operation of the ship. For example, in the USS Fitzgerald collision, which we considered in Module 2, officers on the bridge and the Combat Information Center, the CIC, had fallen out. The CIC was supposed to provide additional navigational backup to watchstanders on the bridge, but there was no support, and the USS Fitzgerald collided with a merchant ship with 7 fatalities, as a result partly of a falling out. You may wish to pause the program to reflect on this question. Let's now look at some more of the leadership behaviours that promote crew well-being. As leaders, we should try to instill a culture on board the vessel in which people are not excluded and in which they communicate well with each other. How do we encourage good communication? Well, it's not by talking at people. It's about encouraging them to speak and about active listening. Active listening means that we are paying very close attention to what someone is saying without interruption, noticing how people are speaking and what they're really communicating. All too often, when people start to speak to us, we stop listening and think of what we want to say instead. Like this.
Do you want me to check for leaks on the vapor header expansion bellows?
We discussed it during the daily work brief, didn't we?
Yes. Okay.
There's no attempt here to understand what lay behind the question. Compare it with a leader who's listening more carefully.
Do you want me to check for leaks on the vapor header expansion bellows?
Do you have any concerns about it?
No, it'll be fine.
Remind me how you are going to carry out the work?
The vapor dome is about 1.5 metres from the deck, so I'll use a step ladder.
OK. And the test?
I'll use soapy water to check for leaks.
Right. And are there any problems we might not have foreseen?
I was just thinking... Sorry, you've got enough work to do.
This is important. Tell me what you're thinking.
Last time I did that test, the deck became very slippery. I thought, what if the ladder slipped?
Good point. Let's go and make sure the ladder can be safely supported.
The leader here sensed a hesitation and encouraged a dialogue that uncovered a concern and a potentially unsafe condition. This is based on a real event where, unfortunately, the ladder did slip and the cargo engineer was injured. In Module 2 and the Let's Talk programme, we looked at how we break down the walls surrounding talking about mental health. Listening is a crucial aspect of this. Let's look at some of the components of active listening. Show interest. If it's important to the other person, then make time and focus just on the conversation. If you're engaged in some other work when someone wants to talk to you, or you're otherwise distracted, they'll soon realise that you're not genuinely interested. Listen for feelings. Are they struggling? Or do they appear worried, fatigued, overwhelmed? Don't interrupt. Give people time to speak. If they're sharing something that they find embarrassing or hard to express, then you may need to leave silences. Give them space to talk. Probe. This means asking follow-up questions like, tell me more about that, or what does that mean for you? Don't problem solve. As a leader, you'll have spent more time at sea than many of your crew. You may have had similar experiences, but resist the temptation to solve their problem. Oh yes, that happened to me. What you need to do is... Everyone is unique. Allow them to express their issues in their own way and help them arrive at their own solutions. Use open questions. Open questions usually start with why, what, when, where, or how. They lead to more information than closed questions, which just lead to yes or no. You can see how using active listening demands more time, more focus, and more sensitivity to the issues the other person has. You may wish to pause the programme to reflect on this question. The only way to improve communication and therefore well-being on our vessels is to practice the skills of active listening and find opportunities to show the leadership qualities we have outlined in these modules. Authentic attempts to show appropriate concern for the people we lead will usually be appreciated. One thing is certain. We will never know whether a thoughtful conversation, a team activity, or an improvement in the morale of our crew helps keep good people or even saves a life lost to despair. But we do know that teams that communicate better are less likely to have injuries or accidents. Let's leave this module with 5 top tips for leaders. Look after yourself and try to be positive, particularly when others are stressed. Know your team. There's a limited number of crew on the majority of merchant vessels. It should be possible to get to know all crew members, at least to know their names and 1 or 2 things about their background and career. Don't wait for people to come to you. Make time to talk to people and be available when crew need to speak to you. Be fair. Set the same expectations of everyone and do not show favour. Treat everyone with respect. Shouting at people, excluding or ignoring them, or discriminating against some people does not show respect and is likely to lead to poor morale and lower overall levels of well-being on board. In this module, we've looked at some of the relationship issues that seafarers reported as making them unhappy or depressed. We've explored how to create a fair culture on board. And we've considered the value of active listening in conversation with our colleagues. We finished with 5 top tips for leaders. And remember, in order to be a role model for others, you first need to look after yourself. We are reminded each time we take a flight that in the event of oxygen being required, we should put our own masks on first before turning to help others. The same is true for well-being. Take proper rest periods, exercise regularly, and eat well. Then build good relationships with your colleagues.